They'll give a good listen to his proposals on energy, but so far there seems to be.
Brian, it's the president's body language. This is an unfriendly audience. He almost never speaks to unfriendly audiences. His White House events, his campaign events are so staged with supportive audiences chosen by his staff that this is not something he's comfortable with. He does not like to be conciliatory. And then, of course, the other thing we'll be keeping an eye on are the presidential candidates. I think I counted 10 total who are in this audience tonight who say they want to be president, who are going to be recognizing that the cameras are trained on them and will be trained on them throughout the evening. So they will be very cautious with their raised eyebrows, recognizing that their reactions will end up on YouTube forever, but making life a little easier for our cameramen. We have Hillary Clinton sitting directly behind Barack Obama, we can see tonight, so we'll be keeping a close eye on them as well. Brian.
You know, Brian, it's interesting. The Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, acknowledged today to us that she had met with her Democrats and said, best behavior. We are treating the president with civility and respect. And those who know George W. Bush's thinking said the president is going to have, quote, a nice touch when he introduces the speaker as well. Both sides realized the American people had a statement they made in the midterm elections. Boys and girls, start behaving and respecting one another.
That's right. We also know the Democrats under Majority Leader Harry Reid have been spoken to about decorum during the speech and appearing attentive at all times. But that is true. We should expect something as the president marks the change of speaker. There is the change, very visible right now at the top of the picture. The vice president on the left, Speaker of the House Pelosi on the right. Once we get going, when the president is speaking, it's important to keep in mind his the loyal members of his party will be, as he is facing the audience, out to his left. On the right will be where the Democrats are seated in the chamber as the president faces the audience. To the White House we go. NBC News Chief White House Correspondent David Gregory. David, copies of this speech, of course, have circulated prior to its delivery. Most of it embargoed until the president delivers it. But early on, speak to its tone and even entire portions of it.
That's right, Brian, and I think what's most striking as we wait for the president to enter the House chamber is tone. One of the things that's already been reported, I think we can add to it here, is that he will say about his strategy in Iraq and ask Democrats to, quote, give it a chance to work. I don't think I've ever heard language like that from this president in this kind of setting, having covered 6 of these State of the Union addresses. It shows you the state of his presidency politically. It also shows you the state of this Iraq policy. An advisor told me earlier he doesn't want to start a fight with Democrats. He knows that this speech is not going to have any impact at this stage on public opinion or even on the war debate. All that matters now, events on the ground in Baghdad. That's what will move things, and that's the kind of breathing room he's asking for at this stage.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
A little twist on history there. The first speaker was Barry Sullivan, the House Democratic floor manager. The second was the more familiar face of Bill Livengood, the Sergeant at Arms. And here comes the president, as it's been pointed out many times. The man used to setting much of the agenda during the years of his presidency that has changed of late. When he entered this chamber in 2002, he was at an 84% approval rating. Tonight, it is closer to 34, down 50 full points. Tim, however, on this night, when a lot of people do the right thing and cast aside their differences for a short time, a president always finds friends when he comes down the aisle.
It's a wonderful ritual of our democracy. A Democrat, Republican being greeted by members of the opposite party, a back slap, a handshake. saying to the country and the world, you know, we're really in this together, at least for this night. It will be interesting, Brian, when the president talks about immigration, he will be closer to the Democrats than the Republicans in the views he expresses on that subject. And when it comes to Iraq, members of his own party growingly uneasy with what's going on with that war. Why? 21 Republican senators are up for re-election next year. They are very, very nervous about the war in Iraq.
President nearing what is the final turn, front row populated by Supreme Court justices and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Peter Pace, Marine Corps, the first to shake the president's hand.
The president has commented to more than one person over the years, Brian, how intimate he finds this hall. When he at that roster, he said the room is right on top of you. And he likes that. He plays off the crowds. This might be a little bit different because there are more Democrats. But nonetheless, it is that kind of setting that I think most speakers feed off of.
We use wide-angle lenses to give it size, but the truth is the House chamber is surprisingly small for a room with over 435 built-in seats as the president hands copies of his address to the vice president and the
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Thanks to an open mic, we heard the president turn to the speaker and say, "We ready to go?" There's that first gavel that must come before the ritualistic second round of cheers. And we're already seeing how times have changed in Washington. With Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you very much. And tonight I have the high privilege and distinct honor of my own as the first president to begin the State of the Union message with these words: Madam Speaker. In his day, the late Congressman Thomas D'Alessandro Jr. from Baltimore, Maryland, saw Presidents Roosevelt and Truman at this rostrum. But nothing could compare with the sight of his only daughter, Nancy, presiding tonight as Speaker of the House of Representatives. Congratulations, Madam Speaker. Congratulations. Two members of the House and Senate are not with us tonight, and we pray for the recovery and speedy return of Senator Tim Johnson and Congressman Charlie Norwood. Madam Speaker, Vice President Cheney, members of Congress, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens, the rite of custom brings us together at a defining hour when decisions are hard and courage is needed. We enter the year 2007 with large endeavors underway and others that are ours to begin. In all of this, much is asked of us. We must have the will to face difficult challenges and determined enemies, and the wisdom to face together. Some in this chamber are new to the House and the Senate, and I congratulate the Democrat majority. Congress has changed, but not our responsibilities. Each of us is guided by our own convictions, and to these we must stay faithful. Yet we're all held to the same standards and called to serve the same good purposes, to extend this nation's prosperity, to spend the people's money wisely, to solve problems, not leave them to future generations, to guard America against all evil, and to keep faith with those we have sent forth to defend us. We're not the first to come here with a government divided and uncertainty in the air. Like many before us, we can work through our differences, and we can achieve things for the American people. Our citizens don't much care which side of the aisle we sit on, as long as we're willing to cross that aisle when there's work to be done. Our job is to make life better for our fellow Americans and to help them build a future of hope and opportunity, and this is the business before us tonight. A future of hope and opportunity begins with a growing economy, and that is what we have. We're now in the 41st month of uninterrupted job growth, a recovery that has created 7.2 million new jobs so far. Unemployment is low. Inflation is low. Wages are rising. This economy is on the move, and our job is to keep it that way, not with more government, but with more enterprise. Next week, I'll deliver a full report on the state of our economy. Tonight, I want to discuss 3 economic reforms that deserve to be priorities for this Congress. First, we must balance the federal budget. We can do so without raising taxes. What we need is spending discipline in Washington, D.C. We set a goal of cutting the deficit in half by 2009 and met that goal 3 years ahead of schedule. Now let us take the next step. In the coming weeks, I will submit a budget that eliminates the federal deficit within the next 5 years. I ask you to make the same commitment. Together we can restrain the spending appetite of the federal government, and we can balance the federal budget. Next, there's the matter of earmarks. These special interest items are often slipped into bills at the last hour, when not even C-SPAN is watching. In 2005 alone, the number of earmarks grew to over 13,000 and totaled nearly $18 billion. Even worse, over 90% of the earmarks never make it to the floor of the House and the Senate. They're dropped into committee reports that are not even part of the bill that arrives on my desk. You didn't vote them into law. I didn't sign them into law. Yet they are treated as if they have the force of law. The time has come to end this practice. So let us work together to reform the budget process, expose every earmark to the light of day and to a vote in Congress, and cut the number and cost of earmarks at least in half by the end of this session. And finally, to keep this economy strong, we must take on the challenge of entitlements. Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are commitments of conscience, and so it is our duty to keep them permanently sound. Yet we're failing in that duty. And this failure will one day leave our children with three bad options: huge tax increases, huge deficits, or huge and immediate cuts in benefits. Everyone in this chamber knows this to be true, yet somehow we have not found it in ourselves to act. So let us work together and do it now. With enough good sense and goodwill, you and I can fix Medicare and Medicaid and save Social Security. Spreading opportunity and hope in America also requires public schools that give children the knowledge and character they need in life. 5 years ago, we rose above partisan differences to pass the Child Left Behind Act, preserving local control, raising standards, and holding schools accountable for results. And because we acted, students are performing better in reading and math, and minority students are closing the achievement gap. Now the task is to build on this success without watering down standards, without taking control from local communities, and without backsliding and calling it reform. We can lift student achievement even higher by giving local leaders flexibility to turn around failing schools, and by giving families with children stuck in failing schools the right to choose someplace better. We must increase funds for students who struggle and make sure these children get the special help they need. And we can make sure our children are prepared for the jobs of the future and our country is more competitive by strengthening math and science skills. The No Child Left Behind Act has worked for America's children, and I ask Congress to reauthorize this good law. A future of hope and opportunity requires that all our citizens have affordable and available health care. When it comes to health care, government has an obligation to care for the elderly, the disabled, and poor children, and we will meet those responsibilities. For all other Americans, private health insurance is the best way to meet their needs. But many Americans cannot afford a health insurance policy. And so tonight I propose two new initiatives to help more Americans afford their own insurance. First, I propose a standard tax deduction for health insurance that will be like the standard tax deduction for dependents. Families with health insurance will pay no income on payroll tax or payroll taxes on $15,000 of their income. Single Americans with health insurance will pay no income or payroll taxes on $7,500 of their income. With this reform, more than 100 million men, women, and children who are now covered by employer-provided insurance will benefit from lower tax bills. At the same time, this reform will level the playing field for those who do not get health insurance through their job. For Americans who now purchase health insurance on their own, this proposal would mean a substantial tax savings. $4,500 for a family of four making $60,000 a year. And for the millions of other Americans who have no health insurance at all, this deduction would help put a basic private health insurance plan within their reach. Changing the tax code is a vital and necessary step to making health care affordable for more Americans. My second proposal is to help the states that are coming up with innovative ways to cover the uninsured. States that make basic private health insurance available to all their citizens should receive federal funds to help and provide this coverage to the poor and the sick. I've asked the Secretary of Health and Human Services to work with Congress to take existing federal funds and use them to create affordable choices grants. These grants would give our nation's governors more money and more flexibility to get private health insurance to those most in need. There are many other ways that Congress can help. We need to expand health savings accounts. We need to help small businesses through association health plans. We need to reduce costs in medical with better information technology. We will encourage price transparency, and to protect good doctors from junk lawsuits, we need to pass medical liability reform. In all we do, we must remember that the best healthcare decisions are not made by government and insurance companies, but by patients and their doctors. Extending hope and opportunity requires an immigration system worthy of America, with laws that are fair and borders that are secure. When laws and borders are routinely violated, this harms the interests of our country. To secure our border, we're doubling the size of the Border Patrol and funding new infrastructure and technology. Yet even with all these steps, we cannot fully secure the border unless we take pressure off the border. And that requires a temporary worker program. We should establish a legal and orderly path for foreign workers to enter our country to work on a temporary basis. As a result, they won't have to try to sneak in. And that will leave border agents free to chase down drug smugglers and criminals and terrorists. We'll enforce our immigration laws at the work site and give employers the tools to verify the legal status of their workers, so there's no excuse left for violating the law. We need to uphold the great tradition of the melting pot that welcomes and assimilates new arrivals. We need to resolve the status of the illegal immigrants who are already in our country without animosity and without amnesty. Convictions run deep in this capital when it comes to immigration. Let us have a serious, civil, and conclusive debate so that you can pass and I can sign comprehensive immigration reform into law. Extending hope and opportunity depends on a stable supply of energy that keeps America's economy running and America's environment clean. For too long, our nation has been dependent on foreign oil. And this dependence leaves us more vulnerable to hostile regimes and to terrorists who could cause huge disruptions of oil shipments and raise the price of oil and do great harm to our economy. It's in our vital interest to diversify America's energy supply. The way forward is through technology. We must continue changing the way America generates electric power by even greater use of clean coal technology, solar and wind energy, and clean, safe nuclear power. We need to press on with battery research for plug-in and hybrid vehicles and expand the use of clean diesel vehicles and biodiesel fuel. We must continue investing in new methods of producing ethanol. Using everything from wood chips to grasses to agricultural wastes. We made a lot of progress thanks to good policies here in Washington and the strong response of the market. And now even more dramatic advances are within reach. Tonight I ask Congress to join me in pursuing a goal. Let us build on the work we've done and reduce gasoline usage in the United States by 20% in the next 10 years. When we do that, we will have cut our total imports by the equivalent of 3/4 of all the oil we now import from the Middle East. To reach this goal, we must increase the supply of alternative fuels by setting a mandatory fuel standard to require 35 billion gallons of renewable and alternative fuels in 2017. And that is nearly 5 times the current target. At the same time, we need to reform and modernize fuel economy standards for cars the way we did for light trucks and conserve up to 8.5 billion more gallons of gasoline by 2017. Achieving these ambitious goals will dramatically reduce our dependence on foreign oil, but it's not going to eliminate it. And so as we continue to diversify our fuel supply, we must step up domestic oil production in environmentally sensitive ways. And to further protect America against severe disruptions to our oil supply, I ask Congress to double the current capacity of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. America is on the verge of technological breakthroughs that will enable us to live our lives less dependent on oil. And these technologies will help us be better stewards of the environment. And they will help us to confront the serious challenge of global climate change. The future of hope and opportunity requires a fair, impartial system of justice. The lives of our citizens across our nation are affected by the outcome of cases pending in our federal courts. We have a shared obligation to ensure that the courts have enough judges to hear those cases and deliver timely rulings. As President, I have a duty to nominate qualified men and women to vacancies on the federal bench, and the United States Senate has a duty as well to give those nominees a fair hearing and a prompt up or down vote on the Senate floor. For all of us in this room, there's no higher responsibility than to protect the people of this country from danger. 5 years have come and gone since we saw the scenes and felt the sorrow that the terrorists can cause. We've had time to take stock of our situation. We've added many critical protections to guard the homeland. We know with certainty that the horrors of that September morning were just a glimpse of what the terrorists intend for us, unless we stop them. This is a time we find ourselves debating the causes of conflict and the course we have followed. Such debates are essential when a great democracy faces great questions. And one question has surely been settled, that to win the war on terror, we must take the fight to the enemy. From the start, America and our allies have protected our people by staying on the offense. The enemy knows that the days of comfortable sanctuary, easy movement, steady financing, and free-flowing communications are long over. For the terrorist, life since 9/11 has never been the same. Our success in this war is often measured by the things that did not happen. We cannot know the extent of the attacks that we and our allies have prevented, but here's some of what we do know. We stopped an al-Qaeda plot to fly a hijacked airplane into the tallest building on the West Coast. We broke up a Southeast Asian terrorist cell grooming operatives for attacks inside the United States. We uncovered an al-Qaeda cell developing anthrax to be used in attacks against America. And just last August, British authorities uncovered a plot to blow up passenger planes bound for America over the Atlantic Ocean. For each life saved, we owe a debt of gratitude to the brave public servants who devote their lives to finding the terrorists and stopping them. Every success against the terrorists is a reminder of the shoreless ambitions of this enemy. The evil that inspired and rejoiced in 9/11 is still at work in the world. And so long as that's the case, America is still a nation at war. In the mind of the terrorists, this war began well before September the 11th and will not end until their radical vision is fulfilled. And these past 5 years have given us a much clearer view of the nature of this enemy. Al-Qaeda and its followers are Sunni extremists, possessed by hatred and commanded by a harsh and narrow ideology. Take almost any principle of civilization, and their goal is the opposite. They preach with threats, instruct with bullets and bombs, and promise paradise for the murder of the innocent. Our enemies are quite explicit about their intentions. They want to overthrow moderate governments, establish safe havens from which to plan and carry out new attacks on our country. By killing and terrorizing Americans, they want to force our country to retreat from the world and abandon the cause of liberty. They would then be free to impose their will and spread their totalitarian ideology. Listen to this warning from the late terrorist Zarqawi. We will sacrifice our blood and bodies to put an end to your dreams, and what is coming is even worse. Osama bin Laden declared better than living on this earth with the unbelievers among us. These men are not given to idle words, and they are just one camp in the Islamist radical movement. In recent times, it has also become clear that we face an escalating danger from Shia extremists who are just as hostile to America and are also determined to dominate the Middle East. Many are known to take direction from the regime in Iran, which is funding and arming terrorists like Hezbollah, a group second only to al-Qaeda and the American lives it has taken. The Shia and Sunni extremists are different faces of the same totalitarian threat. Whatever slogans they chant, when they slaughter the innocent, they have the same wicked purposes. They want to kill Americans, kill democracy in the Middle East, and gain the weapons to kill on an even more horrific scale. In the 6 years since our nation was attacked, I wish I could report to you that the dangers have ended. They have not. And so it remains the policy of this government to use every lawful and proper tool of intelligence, diplomacy, law enforcement, and military action to do our duty to find these enemies and to protect the American people. This war is more than a clash of arms. It is a decisive ideological struggle, and the security of our nation is in the balance. To prevail, we must remove the conditions that inspire blind hatred and drove 19 men to get onto airplanes and to come and kill us. What every terrorist fears most is human freedom. Societies where men and women make their own choices, answer their conscience, and live by their hopes instead of their resentments. Free people are not drawn to violent and malignant ideologies, and most will choose a better way when they're given a chance. So we advance our own security interests by helping moderates and reformers and brave voices for democracy. The great question of our day is whether America will help men and women in the Middle East to build free societies and share in the rights of all humanity. And I say, for the sake of our own security, we must. In the last 2 years, we've seen the desire for liberty in the broader Middle East, and we have been sobered by the enemy's fierce reaction. 2005, the world watched as the citizens of Lebanon raised the banner of the Cedar Revolution. They drove out the Syrian occupiers and chose new leaders in free elections. In 2005, the people of Afghanistan defied the terrorists and elected a democratic legislature. And in 2005, the Iraqi people held 3 national elections, choosing a transitional government, adopting the most progressive democratic constitution in the Arab world, and then electing a government under that constitution. Despite endless threats from the killers in their midst, nearly 12 million Iraqi citizens came out to vote in a show of hope and solidarity that we should never forget. A thinking enemy watched all these scenes, adjusted their tactics, and in 2006, they struck back. In Lebanon, assassins took the life of Pierre Gemayel, a prominent participant in the Cedar Revolution. Hezbollah terrorists with support from Syria and Iran sowed conflict in the region and are seeking to undermine Lebanon's legitimately elected government. In Afghanistan, Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters tried to regain power by regrouping and engaging Afghan and NATO forces. In Iraq, al-Qaeda and other Sunni extremists blew up one of the most sacred places in Shia Islam, the Golden Mosque of Samarra. This atrocity, directed at a Muslim house of prayer, was designed to provoke retaliation from Iraqi Shia, and it succeeded. Radical Shia elements, some of whom received support from Iran, formed death squads. The result was a tragic escalation of sectarian rage and reprisal that continues to this day. This is not the fight we entered in Iraq, but it is the fight we are in. Every one of us wishes this war were won. Yet it would not be like us to leave our promises unkept, our friends abandoned, and our own security at risk. Ladies and gentlemen, on this day, at this hour, it is still within our power to shape the outcome of this battle. Let us find our resolve and turn events toward victory. We're carrying out a new strategy in Iraq, a plan that demands more from Iraq's elected government and gives our forces in Iraq the reinforcements they need to complete their mission. Our goal is a democratic Iraq that upholds the rule of law, respects the rights of its people, provides them security, and is an ally in the war on terror. In order to make progress toward this goal, the Iraqi government must stop the sectarian violence in its capital. But the Iraqis are not yet ready to do this on their own. So we're deploying reinforcements of more than 20,000 additional soldiers and Marines to Iraq. The vast majority will go to Baghdad, where they will help Iraqi forces to clear and secure neighborhoods and serve as advisors embedded in Iraqi army units. With Iraqis in the lead, our forces will help secure the city by chasing down the terrorists, insurgents, and the roaming death squads. And in Anbar province, where al-Qaeda terrorists have gathered and local forces have begun showing a willingness to fight them, we're sending an additional 4,000 United States Marines with orders to find the terrorists and clear them out. We didn't drive al-Qaeda out of their safe haven in Afghanistan, only to let them set up a new safe haven in a free Iraq. People of Iraq want to live in peace, and now it's time for their government to act. Iraq's leaders know that our commitment is not open-ended. They have promised to deploy more of their own troops to secure Baghdad, and they must do so. They pledge that they will confront violent radicals of any faction or political party, and they need to follow through and lift needless restrictions on Iraqi and coalition forces so these troops can achieve their mission of bringing security to all of the people of Baghdad. Iraq's leaders have committed themselves to a series of benchmarks to achieve reconciliation, to share oil revenues among all Iraq's citizens, the wealth of Iraq into the rebuilding of Iraq, to allow more Iraqis to re-enter their nation's civic life, to hold local elections, and to take responsibility for security in every Iraqi province. But for all this to happen, Baghdad must be secure. And our plan will help the Iraqi government take back its capital and make good on its commitments. My fellow citizens, our military commanders and I have carefully weighed the options, discussed every possible approach. In the end, I chose this course of action because it provides the best chance for success. Many in this chamber understand that America must not fail in Iraq, because you understand that the consequences of failure would be grievous and far-reaching. If American forces step back before Baghdad is secure, the Iraqi government would be overrun by extremists on all sides. We could expect an epic battle between Shia extremists backed by Iran and Sunni extremists by al-Qaeda and supporters of the old regime. A contagion of violence could spill out across the country, and in time, the entire region could be drawn into the conflict. For America, this is a nightmare scenario. For the enemy, this is the objective. Chaos is the greatest ally, their greatest ally in this struggle. And out of chaos in Iraq would emerge an emboldened enemy with new safe havens, new recruits, new resources, and an even greater determination to harm America. To allow this to happen would be to ignore the lessons of September the 11th and invite tragedy. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing is more important at this moment in our history than for America to succeed in the Middle East, to succeed in Iraq, and to spare the American people from this danger. This is where matters stand tonight, in the here and now. I've spoken with many of you in person. I respect you and the arguments you've made. We went into this largely united in our assumptions and in our convictions. And whatever you voted for, you did not vote for failure. Our country is pursuing a new strategy in Iraq, and I ask you to give it a chance to work. And I ask you to support our troops in the field and those on their way. The war on terror we fight today is a generational struggle that will continue long after you and I have turned our duties over to others. And that's why it's important to work together so our nation can see this great effort through. Both parties and both branches should work in close consultation. That's why I've proposed to establish a special advisory council on the war on terror, made up of leaders in Congress from both political parties. We will share ideas for how to position America to meet every challenge that confronts us. We'll show our enemies abroad that we're united in the goal of victory. And one of the first steps we can take together is to add to the ranks of our military so that the American armed forces are ready for all the challenges ahead. Tonight, I ask the Congress to authorize an increase in the size of our active Army and Marine Corps by 92,000 in the next 5 years. Second task we can take on together is to design and establish a volunteer civilian reserve corps. Such a corps would function much like our military reserve. It would ease the burden on the armed forces by allowing us to hire civilians with critical skills to serve on missions abroad when America needs them. It would give people across America who do not wear the uniform a chance to serve in the defining struggle of our time. Americans can have confidence in the outcome of this struggle because we're not in this struggle alone. We have a diplomatic strategy that is rallying the world to join in the fight against extremism. In Iraq, multinational forces are operating under a mandate from the United Nations. We're working with Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the Gulf states to increase support for Iraq's government. The United Nations has imposed sanctions on Iran and made it clear that the world will not allow the regime in Tehran to acquire nuclear weapons. Other members of the quartet, the UN, the EU, and Russia were pursuing diplomacy to help bring peace to the Holy Land and pursuing the establishment of a democratic Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in peace and security. In Afghanistan, NATO has taken the lead in turning back the Taliban and al-Qaeda offensive, the first time the alliance has deployed forces outside the North Atlantic area. Together with our partners in China and Japan, Russia, and South Korea, we're pursuing intensive diplomacy to achieve a Korean peninsula free of nuclear weapons. We will continue to speak out for the cause of freedom in places like Cuba, Belarus, and Burma, and continue to awaken the conscience of the world to save the people of Darfur. American foreign policy is more than a matter of war and diplomacy. Our work in the world is also based on a timeless truth: to whom much is given, much is required. We hear the call to take on the challenges of hunger and poverty and disease, and that is precisely what America is doing. We must continue to fight HIV/AIDS, especially on the continent of Africa. Because you funded the emergency plan for AIDS relief, the number of people receiving life-saving drugs has grown from 50,000 to more than 800,000 in short years. I ask you to continue funding our efforts to fight HIV/AIDS, and I ask you to provide $1.2 billion over 5 years so we can combat malaria in 15 African countries. I ask that you fund the Millennium Challenge account so that American aid reaches the people who need it in nations where democracy is on the rise and corruption is in retreat. And let us continue to support the expanded trade and debt relief that are the best hope for lifting lives and eliminating poverty. When America serves others in this way, we show the strength and generosity of our country. These deeds reflect the character of our people. The strength we have is the heroic kindness and courage and self-sacrifice of the American people. You see this spirit often if you know where to look. And tonight, we need only look above to the gallery. Dikembe Mutombo grew up in Africa amid great poverty and disease. He came to Georgetown University on a scholarship to study medicine. Coach John Thompson took Dikembe and had a different idea. Dikembe became a star in the NBA and a citizen of the United States. But he never forgot the land of his birth or the duty to share his blessings with others. He built a brand new hospital in his old hometown. A friend has said of this good-hearted man, Mutombo believes that God has given him this opportunity to do great things. And we're proud to call this son of the Congo a citizen of the United States of America. After her daughter was born, Julie Eigner Clark searched for ways to share her love of music and art with her child. So she borrowed some equipment and began filming children's videos in her basement. The Baby Einstein Company was born, and in just 5 years, her business grew to more than $20 million in sales. November 2001, Julie sold Baby Einstein to Walt Disney Company, and with her help, Baby Einstein has grown into a $200 million business. Julie represents the great enterprising spirit of America, and she's using her success to help others, producing child safety videos with John Walsh of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Julie says of her new project, "I believe it is the most important thing I have ever done. I believe that children have the right to live in a world that is safe." And so tonight, we are pleased to welcome this talented business entrepreneur and generous social entrepreneur, Julie Eigner Clark. Three weeks ago, Wesley Autry was waiting at a Harlem subway station with his two little girls when he saw a man fall into the path of a train. With seconds to act, Wesley jumped onto the tracks, pulled the man into the space between the rails, and held him as the train passed right above their heads. He insists he's not a hero. He says, "We got guys and girls overseas dying for us to have our freedoms. We have got to show each other some love. There is something wonderful about a country that produces a brave and humble man like Wesley Autry." Tommy Riemann was a teenager pumping gas in Independence, Kentucky when he enlisted in the United States Army. In December 2003, he was on a reconnaissance mission in Iraq when his team came under heavy enemy fire. From his Humvee, Sergeant Riemann returned fire. He used his body as a shield to protect his gunner. He was shot in the chest and arm and received shrapnel wounds to his legs. Yet he refused medical attention and stayed in the fight. He helped to repel a second attack, firing grenades at the enemy's position. For his exceptional courage, Sergeant Riemann was awarded the Silver Star. And like so many other Americans who have volunteered to defend us, he has earned the respect and the gratitude of our entire country. In such courage and compassion, ladies and gentlemen, we see the spirit and character of America. And these qualities are not in short supply. This is a decent and honorable country, and resilient too. We've been through a lot together. We've met challenges and faced dangers, and we know that more lie ahead. Yet we can go forward with confidence, because the state of our union is strong. Our cause in the world is right. And tonight, that cause goes on. God bless.
A strong finish, assisted in no small part by the man who threw himself over another individual under a New York City subway train. A speech that lasted 49 minutes, interrupted by applause 62 times. And in that way, Tim, as we see the president saying farewell to the new Speaker of the House, it was palpably different than any other you and I have seen this president deliver.
The president had told his advisors, Brian, that he was going to be sober tonight. It was that and more. It was somber. It really did not have the energy or enthusiasm or passion that we have seen George Bush give his speeches from this rostrum in previous years, until he started talking about the troops in Iraq and introducing those extraordinary heroes at the end. It's a recognition, I believe, of divided government, of his political standing, and I think it's a real insight into his mindset as he approaches the final 2 years of his presidency.
Before the speech, we pointed out a first this year, and that is having a correspondent able to report from and talk to us from the floor of the House chamber. And Campbell Brown, I assume you would concur with that analysis, having been there for it.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. It was obviously a carefully worded speech to try to ensure, I think, as few awkward moments as possible. There was a lot in there that everyone could applaud for, but it definitely felt from inside the chamber extremely subdued. I was in this room last year. They're not able to report from here, and there was a huge difference. Certainly our producer said over the last 7 State of the Unions he's heard, you have felt that. I mean, it was a somber speech about the war, yes, but you also saw these moments where Republicans were sitting on their hands. When he talked about immigration reform, when he talked about global warming, there were a number of Republicans who did not stand, who did not applaud. So it gave that feeling of far more subdued. The only other thing I would add, Brian and Tim, is that this is the first State of the Union the president's delivered that hasn't been written by Mike Gerson, who was the president's beloved speechwriter and who left the White House last summer. And White House officials have acknowledged that he's also a tough act to follow, that he, really got the president. And I think that may have had something to do with it as well.
Campbell Brown from the floor of the House chamber as we watch the president exit a process quicker than usual because of all this. To David Gregory at the White House. And David, now begins the hard part. No direct successor, 24 months left in office. Sometimes it seemed like every camera shot was within range of a candidate for president in that chamber tonight. Is there, do you think, a list of White House initiatives that are safe, that they'd like to get through, to be able to get some things through early on?
Well, they don't have a lot of time, Brian, and you and Tim have talked about that. They recognize that. There are areas, education, immigration, maybe even aspects of health care where they can find some common ground. That the president's initiative in terms of the tax code has been criticized on both the right and the left. But the time frame matters. And when it comes to the war, that's what overshadows everything. You talk about presidential contenders, their positioning, their jockeying on the war, so it's a distraction. And there's this fundamental divide. The president said at the end of this address that our cause in the world is right, that it is just. There's a fundamental disagreement about that cause in the world right now. The president arguing of the consequences of failure in Iraq or withdrawal from Iraq. Democrats clearly do not share that point of view. And that fundamental divide is going to be playing out as these resolutions criticizing the president's commitment of additional troops is debated in the coming days and weeks, Brian.
And Chip Reid, who covers Capitol Hill for NBC News, how do you go about, if you are the White House, again, a White House used to, if not controlling the agenda, having their way with control of Congress? Crowd tonight at times. How do you do this?
Well, the White House won't be able to, Brian. The Democrats in briefings today made very clear that they believe they are in charge of the agenda. They're very happy to hear the president's suggestions, but that's how they're taking them. For example, Barack Obama has already put out a press release saying that he believes that the proposals on energy and health care need to be addressed. He said they're serious proposals, but he also said we'll see if his bold rhetoric is followed by bold action, actually reaching across the aisle and working with Democrats. And I'll tell you, Brian, on Iraq, even before the president uttered the first word, Democrats were almost universally condemning his speech ahead of time. They felt that they knew ahead of time what he was going to say. They knew they were going to reject it. They believe it's a policy of the past. It is not the change that voters called for. And beginning tomorrow, they start debating a resolution to reject his proposal for an increase, and they believe that they're going to get a significant number of Republicans in the Senate to join with them. So on the proposal, skeptical. On Iraq, absolute rejection, Brian.
Chip Reid here on the Hill with us tonight as the president nears the exit. Andrea Mitchell also watching all of this along with us as chief foreign affairs correspondent. Andrea, what a difference a few years can make.
It certainly does, and as you've been reporting, all of you, the somber quality to this. The fact is, when he talked tonight about the nightmare scenario of Sunni and Shia extremists up against each other, should we fail in Iraq, should we not continue, that, according to critics in both parties, is what is already happening in the streets of Baghdad and in Anbar province. So that is why he is not going to get the support for the Iraq policy that he is appealing for tonight. According to the critics, largely Democrats, but now we know also many Republicans, the unfolding of what has happened and the failure of the Maliki government to step up to the task has already transpired, and they do not feel that these additional 20,000 troops should be put in harm's way, and they don't feel this will work. Brian?
Andrea Mitchell watching along with us tonight as the president, no shortage of autograph requests on his way up the aisle and out of the chamber. Always interesting that every one of these members of the House and Senate, very important people back home in their states and districts, still very important to them that they have the program of tonight's State of the Union address signed in Sharpie by the president as a memento of this occasion. We should explain to you what's about to happen. The president is nearing the door. That's the sergeant at arms right there in the foreground, Bill Livengood. When the president goes through the door and it is closed, that starts a clock, which then counts us down to the Democratic response tonight, which, of course, we will carry. And a very interesting choice for the Democrats. It's going to be one of the newly minted senators, Jim Webb of the state of Virginia. So the clock has started with the president now back in the holding room portion U.S. Capitol. We will take this moment to take a break as the president, we can almost listen in to legislation almost.
It was a great exchange, Brian. Tom Harkin, the senator from Iowa, said, ethanol, I was the first one on my feet.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. Iowa.
Yeah, and we watched
corn.
We watched Grassley do the same thing during that applause break. So we'll take a break, and we will come back and have the Democratic response. A bit about Senator Webb himself when our live NBC News coverage of the State of the Union address continues.
My dad and I have been in the septic business for over 40 years. A septic system today can cost many, many thousands of dollars to replace. In my opinion, using Rid-X once a month makes costly repairs less likely.
Rid-X uses 100% natural bacteria enzymes to break down hard-to-dissolve waste, even paper, to help keep your septic system operating efficiently and prevent backups between pumpings.
I've always recommended Rid-X, and I've never recommended anything else.
Rid-X, the #1 septic treatment brand.
Look at all this room!
It's an enterprise rental heading toward a weekend adventure at 50% off. That's Friday to Monday, 50% off. Most cars, most weekends, most neighborhood locations. Pick Enterprise. We'll pick you up.
When you get a cold, you can't always slow down, but you can get the relief you need to keep going. With NyQuil at night and DayQuil during the day. Feel better faster.
Hi, Jay Bush and Cousin Drew here for Bush's Homestyle Chili.
I slow cook it according to a secret family recipe with premium ground beef and a special blend of spices for a homemade taste.
Say, Drew, what do you say you let me see where you keep the secret family recipe?
All right, Jay, but don't tell your dog Duke. He can't keep a secret. How did you get in here?
Oh, I had some doggy doors put in.
Enjoy Bush's Homestyle Chili. Looks like homemade, tastes like homemade.
Americans respond to the State of the Union. NBC Nightly News tomorrow.
When teens are hungry, it seems like there are two of them. New Totino's Mega Pizza Rolls. Twice the delicious filling for twice the appetite. Mega Pizza Rolls, new from Totino's.
Christy Brinkley's candid new divorce tell-all. Next Extra.
We are back again. The clock is moving. We're under 2 minutes until the Democratic response, which will be delivered by the new Republican senator representing the Commonwealth of Virginia, Jim Webb. Born in 1946 in Missouri, he's an Annapolis grad, Georgetown Law, father of 5, former Navy secretary, author, screenwriter, journalist, son of an Air Force captain in World War II. Webb himself became a Marine. He's got a son who is a Marine and who is on the skids waiting to go, Tim, into Iraq after one tour already as part of this surge. So an interesting choice of Webb to give the Democratic response.
Ronald Reagan, Secretary of the Navy, but who's a Democrat, Brian, to his he loves Andrew Jackson, economic populism. He was against the war in Iraq, but is sending his own son. The night he was elected, which tipped the Senate into the Democratic column, he walked out on the stage and raised 2 boots, the boots of his son that he had worn the entire campaign. This is an emotional man, but he's tough and no nonsense when it comes to his analysis of the war. I think we'll hear a lot of that tonight.
And we were told today by the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, that the speech was prepared, as is custom by the party, for Senator Webb. Would have none of it. This man who's been a writer a lot of his professional life prior to politics and during, ripped it up in effect and started his own and has written the speech he will deliver tonight. We're also told that as delivered, this speech should run about 8 minutes. You can expect a highly personal text. And now the junior senator from Virginia, Jim Webb, from here on Capitol Hill.
Good evening. I'm Senator Jim Webb from Virginia, where this year we will celebrate the 400th anniversary of the settlement of James, an event that marked the first step in the long journey that has made us the greatest and most prosperous nation on earth. It wouldn't be possible in this short amount of time to actually rebut the president's message, nor would it be useful. let me simply say that we in the Democratic Party hope that this administration is serious about improving education and health care for all Americans and addressing such domestic priorities as restoring the vitality of the great city of New Orleans. Further, this is the 7th time the President has mentioned energy independence in his State of the Union message, but for the first time, this exchange is taking place in a Congress led by the Democratic Party. We are looking for affirmative solutions that will strengthen our nation by freeing us from our dependence on foreign oil and spurring a wave of entrepreneurial growth in the form of alternate energy programs. We look forward to working with the President and his party to bring about these changes. There are 2 areas where our respective parties have largely stood in contradiction, and I want to take a few minutes to address them tonight. The first relates to how we see the health of our economy, how we measure it, and how we ensure that its benefits are properly shared among all Americans. The second regards our foreign policy, how we might bring the war in Iraq to a proper conclusion that will also allow us to continue to fight the war against international terrorism and to address other strategic concerns that our country faces around the world. When one looks at the health of our economy, it's almost as if we're living in 2 different countries. Some say that things have never been better. The stock market is at an all-time high, and so are corporate profits. But these benefits are not being fairly shared. When I graduated from college, the average corporate CEO made 20 times what the average worker did. Today, it's nearly 400 times. In other words, it takes the average worker more than a year to make the money that his or her boss makes in one day. Wages and salaries for our workers are at all-time lows as a percentage of national wealth, even though the productivity of American workers is the highest in the world. Medical costs have skyrocketed. College tuition rates are off the charts. Our manufacturing base is being dismantled and sent overseas. Good American jobs are being sent with them. In short, the middle class of this country, our historic backbone, and our best hope for a strong society in the future is losing its place at the table. Our workers know this through painful experience. Our white-collar professionals are beginning to understand it as their jobs start disappearing also. And they expect, rightly, that in this age of globalization, their government has a duty to insist that their concerns be dealt with fairly in the international marketplace. In the early days of our republic, President Andrew Jackson established an important principle of American-style democracy, that we should measure the health of our society not at its apex, but at its base, not with the numbers that come out of Wall Street, but with the living conditions that exist on Main Street. We must recapture that spirit today. Under the leadership of the new Democratic Congress, we're on our way to doing so. The House just passed a minimum wage increase, the first in 10 years, and the Senate will soon follow. We've introduced a broad legislative package designed to regain the trust of the American people. We've established a tone of cooperation and consensus that extends beyond party lines. We're working to get the right things done for the right people and for the right reasons. With respect to foreign policy, this country has patiently endured a mismanaged war for nearly 4 years. Many, including myself, warned even before the war began that it was unnecessary, that it would take our energy and attention away from the larger war against terrorism, and that invading and occupying Iraq would leave us strategically vulnerable in the most violent and turbulent corner of the world. I want to share with all of you a picture that I have carried with me for more than 50 years. This is my father when he was a young Air Force captain flying cargo planes during the Berlin airlift. He sent us the picture from Germany as we waited for him back here at home. When I was a small boy, I used to take the picture to bed with me every night because for more than 3 years my father was deployed, unable to live with us full-time, serving overseas or in bases where there was no family housing. I still keep it to remind me of the sacrifices that my mother and others had to make over and over again as my father gladly served the country. I was proud to follow in his footsteps, serving as a Marine in Vietnam. My brother did as well, serving as a Marine helicopter pilot. My son has joined the tradition, now serving as an infantry Marine in Iraq. Like so many other Americans today and throughout our history, we served and have served not for political reasons, but because we love our country. On the political issues, those matters of war and peace, and in some cases life and death, we trusted the judgment of our national leaders. We hoped that they would be right, that they would measure with accuracy the value of our lives against the enormity of the national interest that might call upon us to go into harm's way. We owed them our loyalty as Americans, and we gave it. But they owed us sound judgment, clear thinking, concern for our welfare, a guarantee that the threat to our country was equal to the price we might be called upon to pay in defending it. The President took us into this war recklessly. He disregarded warnings from the National Security Advisor during the first Gulf War, the Chief of Staff of the Army, 2 former commanding generals of Central Command whose jurisdiction includes Iraq, the Director of Operations on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and many, many others with great integrity and long experience in national security affairs. We are now, as a nation, held hostage to the predictable and predicted disarray that has followed. The war's costs to our nation have been staggering financially, to our reputation around the world, the lost opportunities to defeat the forces of international terrorism, and especially the precious blood of our citizens who stepped forward to serve. The majority of the nation no longer supports this war, the way this war is being fought, nor does the majority of our military, nor does the majority of Congress. We need a new direction. Not one step back from the war against international terrorism, not a precipitous withdrawal that ignores the possibility of further chaos, but an immediate shift towards strong, regionally based diplomacy, a policy that takes our soldiers off the streets of Iraq's cities, and a formula that will in short order allow our combat forces to leave Iraq. On both of these vital issues, our economy and our national security, it falls upon those of us in elected office to take action. Regarding the economic imbalance in our country, I'm reminded of the situation President Theodore Roosevelt faced in the early days of the 20th century. America was then, as now, drifting apart along class lines. The so-called robber barons were unapologetically raking in a huge percentage of the national wealth. The dispossessed workers at the bottom were threatening revolt. Roosevelt spoke strongly against these divisions. He told his fellow Republicans that they must set themselves, quote, as resolutely against improper corporate influence on the one hand as against demagogy and mob rule on the other. And he did something about it. As I look at Iraq, I recall the words of former General and soon-to-be President Dwight Eisenhower during the dark days of the Korean War, which had fallen to a bloody stalemate. When comes the end? Asked the general who had commanded our forces in Europe during World War II. And as soon as he became president, he brought the Korean War to an end. These presidents took the right kind of action for the benefit of the American people and for the health of our relations around the world. Tonight, we're calling on this president to take similar action in both areas. If he does, we will join him. If he does not, we will be showing him the way. Thank you for listening, and God bless America.
Senator Webb of Virginia with the Democratic response, father, notably, of a 24-year-old Marine in combat in Iraq whose deployment, we are told, could be extended as part of this surge. Tim Russert, as we said going in, interesting choice for the Democrats.
And he threw down the gauntlet, Brian. The president in his speech said, this is not the war we entered, but it's the war we are now in. Jim Webb countered by saying, you brought us there recklessly. Now it's time to get us out. If you don't do it, we're going to do it. Quite interesting to see how Congress will this week vote against the president sending more troops over in a non-binding resolution. As the summer and the fall approach, will the Democrats attempt to cut off funding if that is necessary to stop the war? This is a very tense and important time in Washington.
Tim, 2 members of the U.S. Senate have been kind enough to Join us fresh from the chamber and witnessing the President's State of the Union. Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican of South Carolina, Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, Democrat, of course, from New York, and newly minted official presidential candidate. Thank you both for joining us. And Senator Graham, we'll begin with you. What will happen to Republican cohesion on your side of the aisle if these resolutions against the president's stand on the war begin, and if there's one that can attract, as the Democrats predict, 12 to 15 Republicans, making it filibuster-proof? What happens then?
Well, here's my comment to Senator Webb. I appreciate his service. I appreciate his son's service. To every member of Congress, I urge you not to vote for a resolution that would declare this new strategy a failure before General Petraeus has a chance to implement it. When you say that you're against the new strategy, against the new surge, you're basically saying you have no confidence in General Petraeus. It's a non-binding resolution. You're sending our kids off to war with a vote of no confidence in them, their mission. Those on the other side, our enemies, are listening. They will see it as a weakened resolve. And I would say to Senator Webb and anybody else, if you think this is a lost cause, this is a war of folly, this is Vietnam, cut off funding. The worst thing anybody can do is pass a resolution declaring the war lost, no confidence in the commander who will fight it and the troops to follow. So I hope Republicans and Democrats will not send that message. If you really believe it's a bad idea, cut off funding.
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina. Thank you very much, Senator. Because of time, we go right to Senator Clinton of New York. And Senator Clinton, this brings us to the issue of the hour. Is the Democratic position that if it were to happen today, the keys, in effect, to Iraq could be handed over to the Iraqi military? Is it your party's position that they could do the job being done, the job proposed by the so-called surge of U.S. troops?
Well, the Democratic position, as eloquently articulated by Senator Webb, is that we need a comprehensive approach. The escalation proposed by the president is not such an approach. We need a full-court diplomatic effort. We need to bring pressure and leverage on the Iraqi government to begin to deal with the political problems it has internally. And what we have instead is a strategy that, by most accounts, by the experts with whom I've conferred, by public comments by many others, is really more of the same. We've gone down this road before. Our goal is, as it has been for a year and a half, to begin a phased redeployment to move our troops out of harm's way. When I returned from Iraq, I clearly disagree with the president's proposal and believe we should be bringing more pressure on the Iraqi government to take the actions in its own self-interest and to pursue its own security.
Senator Clinton, thank you. To keep things fair, we're going to limit the time on both sides. Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, Democrat of New York, and Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina. Tim, time for a very quick final word. The Democrats are confident they might put together an Uber resolution, join the language, and get some crossovers. It will send a powerful message.
But non-binding. The troops will go over there, and whatever happens on the ground will, I think, influence this debate, Brian. If it's successful and Baghdad is secure, the president will say, I told you so. If not, I think you'll see senior Republicans go to him and say, Mr. President, you got what you wanted. It didn't work. The time is now.
The president pointing out again tonight his position that as commander-in-chief, this is the only real strategy he can follow. You also heard Senator Webb reference Hurricane Katrina. No reference to that in the president's State of the Union tonight, a very pointed reference at the top of Senator Webb's Democratic response. The president is due to travel tomorrow. This begins the campaign selling his domestic and overseas agenda. As we just saw previewed tonight, there will be a fight in the U.S. Senate over resolution language, over whether or not to vote on such a thing at all, aside, of course, from the argument over funding. Our political coverage continues all evening long on MSNBC, a wrap-up of all of this tomorrow evening when we join you for the next NBC Nightly News. Also tomorrow morning on Today and your late local news. For now, for Tim Russert here in Washington, I'm Brian Williams, NBC News. Good night.
NBC Wednesday, a night of all new deals and drama. Starting with an all-new Friday Night Lights, television's most critically acclaimed new drama. Then, an all-new Deal or No Deal that comes down to 3 cases.
Is the huge amount there, or is it up here?
And on an all-new Medium, a ghost who refuses help has more sinister planned.
You asked for it!
Friday Night Lights, Deal or No Deal, and Medium, an all-new Wednesday on NBC.
Live from NBC4, this is the Channel 4 News.
Is this a break in the case as investigators find the car of a missing Orange County woman, and tonight they're searching the trunk and the interior? Good evening. I'm Chuck Henry.
And I'm Anna Garcia, and welcome to a special edition of Channel 4 News. We begin this special edition with new developments in the search for Amber Lee Hill. She's the Orange County woman who's been missing since January 9th. Today, her car was found in a parking lot in La Palma. And that's where our Vicki Vargas is live tonight with the very latest. Vicki?
And Anna, that car was actually in the very front row of this payroll processing plant. It was parked facing Orangethorpe Avenue, which is a very busy street. All along, authorities had hoped finding the car would be their missing link in this case. Turns out it was not, and it left the most question unanswered. Coroner's investigators searched for clues outside the car, fingerprints, anything that might tell them what happened to Amber Lee Hill. There were no answers, only blood and a pair of tennis shoes found inside the trunk. Does what you found tell you that she's alive or dead at this point?
At this point, I wouldn't be able to speculate on that. It looks like there is some blood. We don't know where that blood came from at this point.
The 38-year-old Stanton woman was last seen 2 weeks ago, leaving her job at this Coca-Cola plant. She told her family she had been threatened after talking to investigators about a sexual harassment lawsuit. 4 days later, some of her belongings were found on a hiking trail in Whittier, but there was still no sign of the missing woman. Then, this afternoon, a security guard at the ADP plant told police the car had been parked here since Thursday. Employees were given an email and told it would be towed if no one claimed it. Did it surprise you that that car could sit there for a week and no one noticed it?
Because of how much it's been going on lately, yeah, it does. Because the parking lot has been pretty much full like it is right now all the time.
Next, investigators say they will check the parking lot's surveillance cameras and plan to send what evidence they do have to the Orange County Crime Lab. Amber's sister showed up here just a short while ago, hoping to get a look at the car. It had already been towed, but she left and appeared visibly upset. Live in La Palma, I'm Vicki Vargas, Channel 4 News.
2 local men are in custody tonight for the murder of a San Francisco police officer in 1971. They are now among 8 people nationwide arrested in connection with this long unsolved case. Channel 4's Ted Chen is live in downtown where those 2 local men are being held now without bail. Ted?
That's right, Chuck. 64-year-old Ray Michael Boudreau and 71-year-old Henry Watson Jones were arrested in Altadena this morning and brought here to Twin Towers Jail in downtown Los Angeles. They are accused, along with 6 others, of venting a murderous rage against law enforcement during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. More than 3 decades after the murder of Sergeant John Young, authorities arrested 8 people in 3 states. 7 are believed to be former members of the Black Liberation Army, an offshoot of the Black Panther Party. Authorities say the BLA carried out a series of attacks on law enforcement in the late 60s and early 70s.
These arrests have been made because of the hard work of the men and women of law enforcement who persisted over many years during this investigation, and also through ability of technological advances in forensic sciences.
Sergeant Young was killed behind a counter at a San Francisco police station in 1971, the gunman firing through a hole in a bulletproof window. 2 New York police officers were killed the same year. Detectives say new technology helped them reopen the cases in 1999, but refused to specify if it was DNA or another type of evidence. The motive, they say, was clear.
Across this country, there were a group of revolutionary groups, including the BLA, bent on creating terror and chaos by assassinating law enforcement officers, and the only purpose was not on who they were, but what they represented.
One of the Southern California men arrested was 64-year-old Ray Michael Boudreau of Altadena. His wife refused to comment when we approached her at their home. Authorities are still looking for a 9th suspect, 62-year-old Ronald Stanley Bridgeforth. They believe he may be in France, Belize, or Tanzania. I spoke to the attorneys for both Boudreau and Jones today. They had no comment on the case, but one said that he was looking forward to defending his client at trial. Reporting live from downtown Los Angeles, Ted Chen, Channel 4 News. Chuck and Anna, back to you.
All right, thank you, Ted. Investigators in the San Fernando Valley tonight are treating the deaths of 2 people in a house fire as possible homicides. The fire broke out this morning at a home in the Granada Hills area. The bodies of a man and a woman were later found inside the home on North Danube Avenue. More now from Channel 4's Doug Kriegel.
All day long, this house in Granada Hills was teeming with investigators. The arson squad, homicide detectives, crime scene analysts, looking for answers and evidence in the rubble. The major questions: how did these 2 people die?